Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today where we are going to be looking at lesson 3 in the OSU PDC Pro program. And with that, with lesson 3, we're also going to take a look at site and regional challenges as well as your sector compass. So without further ado, maybe what I'll do is guess the agenda for today's meeting will be I'll review lesson number 3, and we'll take a look at any of the questions that might be on that Google document. Hello, Melissa. Hope you're well. Um, as well, we'll take any questions from anybody on the call here, and we shall start. So let me just share my screen. There we go. Right on. So here we are on lesson number 3, discussion board. And of course, we have a few tabs here. Let me just get my little spotlight tool. There we go. So the first item up on this lesson is the Site and Regional Challenges Survey. And, that's not such a hard portion of this lesson. That should be pretty easy. We're just looking at some fairly key questions here. What the 3 biggest cultural, socioeconomic challenges in your region. We're also looking at some of the greatest strengths or opportunities. So that's a wonderful thing to focus on. And as well, we are looking at some of the most likely natural disasters that might happen, and what are the strategies for those, and some of the biggest problems and weak links on your design site. So we're kind of looking at the big picture on a regional scale and sort of dialing into your project site and uh, what challenges might be jumping out at you at this point in the course here. So some of the obstacles and the cost of these problems to date. So, and that could come under a number of different things. That could be ecological. Let's say you had some um, erosion issues on your project site, where there's no real financial um, cost, but there could certainly be an ecological cost to that, right? So that is the uh, first part of this lesson, and again, that's reasonably easy, I think. That's been my experience. So what we could do is take a look at one of the student examples we have. And again, you can take a look at, I believe there's 4 of these anyways, and they're under that modules section. So when you log into the platform, you'd go to modules, and the student examples are in the pretty much close to the top of the list there. So you can feel free to take a look at that. If we look at these site challenges, again, there's going to be, not surprisingly, there is some um, overlap or familiarity between, say, some of the challenges in British Columbia here in Canada, Washington, Oregon, California. There's going to be some items that are very similar. We're uh, cost of living, affordability of farmland, affordability of housing, crime, all these things are going to be probably very similar area to area. We do want to really focus on some of the strengths and opportunities because it's pretty easy to figure, to focus in on some of the issues, but we really want to know how that could be improved, how our situation could be improved. And so, yeah, that is the first page. Some of the most likely natural disasters, and there's probably a handful of items you can pull from for Oregon. And some of the strategies that one can implement for resilience here. There's some nice images that have been included, so that's great if you come across any images you think are pertinent, as well as when we get onto your site itself, what are some of the problems or weaknesses that you've observed up to this point? And just listing those here would be great. This student here, so there's potential forest fire, dependency on the electrical grid, and some flooding challenges. So those are good observations. And again, some of the obstacles to that, as well as cost. And then we jump into the SWOT analysis here. Okay, and as usual, we have a feedback and Q&A slide at the end of that. So feel free to add to that if you wish. Let us now just go back and take a look at the next part of the lesson, which is the main event. And one way we can tell that is just going to that rubric breakout, and you can see site regional challenges. We're getting 4 points and 10 points for the sector compass. So we know that there's going to be a lot more time and energy put into that. So let's take a look at that. And this is a really useful design tool to utilize, and I find it's very helpful for small urban settings right up to larger farm settings. Having a good idea of what outside influences are affecting the project site, and this really does help the design process as you're going through it. Because obviously, if you have, let's say, issues with or concerns with fire, that is something you want to take seriously, and you're going to want to include some strategies within your design to address that. So again, there are a number of different things that we can look at, and we're really looking at these outside energies, and they're quite a variety of those. As you can see, we're looking at sun sectors, right? So we're looking at those winter and summer sun sectors, how the sun interacts with your site during those solstice periods, some of the prevailing winds. So on some project sites, this will be less of an issue than others, but on larger open sites, this is a sector that you really want to take full notice of and have, as part of your design. How can you alleviate some of the negatives of that? Again, that this may be a positive. You may be getting summer winds that are lovely and cooling, and you want to enhance those. So when we go to identify these sectors, we also want to identify our intent. Do we want to amplify them? Do we want to deflect them or accept them? So you may also find that there is a combination of actions here on each sector, but often it is one single one. So in these examples here, we have social sectors, noise, pollution, wildlife, water. And again, we want to either amplify, deflect, or accept those sectors. So that's a nice little addition. And then as a side note here, we do want to include, your closest grocery store, population center, fuel, hospital, that sort of thing. And that's quite easy to add in, as we will see here in a student example. So here is one example of the sector compass. And you can see on the right, we have a legend and some notes about each one. And we definitely want to see some notes about each one, just a little description. And again, here with water flows, as you can see, there's two actions, deflect and accept. So this would be seasonally adjusted. So in the winter, undoubtedly, there's some deflection wanted. And in the summer, there is some acceptance. So that may, to some folks, that may sound a little bit backwards to have to want to accept and deflect all in one go. But often some of the stormwater strategies we can employ will help to alleviate the risk of flood, and they will also help to infiltrate water during the summer. So there's some really good tools we can look at that. Again, so that would be in blue here. And I find this is quite a good way of there's a number of different ways you can depict your sector compass. Seems to be a good strategy where you're not overlapping some of the colors. And I can show you what we do with our work and our sector compass, but we kind of follow this concept. But again, there's many ways you can do it. We definitely want to know your summer and winter sun sectors, and those are quite easy to locate through the sun calc. I think there's a sun calculation tool that is in one of our references here. As well, we have prevailing winds, and we have fire, and often there's privacy, or in this case, there's views and public an opening to the road. Wildlife is often part of that, pollution and noise, and neighbors. So that could be privacy. You could label that a couple of different ways. Then on the bottom left and right of this sector map, we have a little bit of information on proximity to stores, etc. So that's a great way to add it. It's not requiring a lot of space, but it puts it all on one map, which is great to see. All right, so we go back to that. Again, you're going to have a SWOT analysis. So I don't know if I took a look at that. There we go. And this is a really interesting exercise to go through in this lesson because we will just have identified all of these outside, call them energies or forces that can influence our project site. And that is going to bring up some thoughts, I'm sure, some observations, which of those are strengths and weaknesses, and where do the opportunities come from and the threats as well. So again, there's a Q&A feedback sheet that you can fill in there, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And as I'm sure most of you have seen, that have asked questions, I often will answer those within your feedback video. All right, so that is what we're up against in this lesson, and I don't think there's anything else. Let me just look at the template file. We'll see if there's anything that jumps out here. So again, I think it's pretty straightforward. This is a nice, you can see the student example is a little bit different to this, in that this slide has changed a little bit since the initial template file was created. And you might find this format works well for you. And again, to have all this information on one page is just really helpful. And it's something you might find you reference during the design process to just keep your eye on the ball, so to speak. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to share. Oh, I see there's a question in the chat. Sorry, I didn't see that earlier. Waking up 2020. Yeah, it is north. I imagine you were talking about the student's example here. So this student lives on Vancouver Island, not too far, probably an hour north of where I am. So it's up around 50 degrees. So yes, it is a little bit north. And that's what we find as you go north, these differences between the summer and winter sectors tend to get larger for sure. So let me just share. And sorry, there's another comment here. Waking up 2020 doesn't seem like there's much sun in the winter. Yes, and that is absolutely, that can certainly happen when you have any significant trees to the south. I know where we live, you know, in our summer solstice, we'll be looking at, we're probably in certain areas, we get about 9 hours of sunlight during the summer. And then when we are in our winter solstice, it's significantly less. And I would say where we live, because we have a lot of trees to the south of us, you know, we're lucky to get a couple hours of direct light during the day. So we're really quite joyful when we get into the February, March, when the sun starts to increase. All right, so here is an example of a sector map we did for a client, I guess it was last year. And a couple of things you're going to notice here, or some of you might. I'm sure most of you have heard or read that I really like to personally see north up on all your base maps. And in this case, you can see north is slightly off, a few degrees off kilter here. So I wouldn't say that's a great, necessarily the best practice, but in this case, that's what we decided to do. And you can see it makes creating these summer and winter sun sectors a little trickier. You just have to be very mindful that it's not, south is not straight down at the bottom of your map. And in this case, we put these sectors in place, and we put a little bit of text associated with them rather than a legend. And we have not made comments on these the way you are going to in your exercise, but it does give a little example as to what sectors may be, because sometimes that's going to be certainly, you know, a foreign, well, we'll just say that not everybody is going to be aware of sectors, and this is a great way of providing a little bit of education to your clients. When we typically put these together, we'll produce a sector map and show that to our clients, usually through a Zoom video. And then if they spot anything that they would like to see adjusted here, you know, and that could be anything. That could be their view corridor or their privacy, you know, we'll make adjustments at that point, and then we're good to go as we're moving forward with their design. So we have a clear understanding of what those outside forces are and how they might influence the project site. So another question here on the chat. So would like to ask more about the sun sector. Yeah, you go right ahead, Waking Up 2020. You can ask it right now if you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, Jamie, it's Carol. I I guess I feel kind of stupid, but I was thinking that the sun sector was what you could go like online and find out about.
Yeah.
But from what you just described, it sounds like what you're saying is that sunset, the reason why it was such a tight little, winter sun sector was because it was specific to that site. So they were taking into account trees and stuff like that. So I was just gonna slap the one I got off the internet on mine. Maybe it's because it's such a huge site, but I hadn't thought about having to figure out the actual sun sector on my piece of land.
Well,
I mean, where the house would go.
yeah, no, I think I would lean towards your approach. I would do your sun sectors based on the region and not so much specific to the site, right?
So
That's
you're
going to
telling me
be,
that one that we just saw a while ago that had this
Mhm.
massive summer one,
Yeah,
and then this teeny sliver was only
yeah,
5 degrees latitude further north than we are?
yeah. Well, and that wasn't my student, and there may have been an error in that, right?
Okay.
But the information is pretty easy to uncover. And then if you have your base map north up, you can easily overlay or transpose that information onto it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that didn't seem possible how tiny that was. So I thought maybe I didn't understand that right. So
Yeah, let's just go back to that.
can't stand seeing myself on this camera. Sorry.
Yeah, that is smaller and
It's not even half. It's like a third the size. That doesn't seem right. Anyway, I it doesn't really matter. I'm just thinking in terms of like wanting to make sure I'm getting that right.
yeah, if you go to SunCalc, this is one of the,
Right, that's what I used.
yeah, and it works. So let's just put in, we'll put in Comox here. That's in and around where this person is. So we just need to change that date. Let's do the winter solstice. That should be the 21st. So that is the solstice. This is the position of the sun
Wow,
at any given moment here. And I think on here we have a way of adjusting that.
that kind of looks right, doesn't it? Wow.
So that is winter. And of course, it's easy to, oops, we'll just go to June. And then there's summer. Yeah, it's pretty dramatic, the difference.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so as we head towards the equator, it's going to get less and less. Yeah. But I wouldn't, just going back to what you were saying, um, I think the best thing to do is what you had said, where you take these sectors off of, or this line off of this website and place it onto your drawing and not go too far into what shade is being cast. That is, we're really going to get into that when we get into microclimates. Okay,
Okay.
so we will be looking at it. It's just not necessarily in this exercise.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. Where was I? Okay. I will stop sharing there and go back. So yeah, I just wanted to show everybody that. Again, that was, it can be very simple, but this is super helpful moving forward. And you can also see by looking at this, if we were actually north up, how much easier that is to interpret as you're designing, right? It's easier for me to know that this is the bottom, you know, because that's going to be important when we start making plans in terms of the solar aspect of the site and where we're going to put certain elements. So we will stop that. And we can just go back to where we were, and we'll take a look to see if we have any questions here. So we do from Brittany. Hello, Brittany. I think you're on the call today. Sun path versus sun rays. Yeah, that's a very good question, and that's not something I've ever come across. In this particular exercise, we're really looking at the path of the sun and how that obviously is going to change from our summer to winter solstice, and how that is going to, okay, not a question, but an observation. Uh-oh. Huh. Okay. So was that the link I sent out? Was that the last link on the email there, Brittany? Because we do have two classes going at one time, so it's possible
That typing there is not actually from me. Not a question, but an observation. I didn't write that. I don't know who wrote that on the document. That one wasn't mine.
Oh, sorry, I only heard part of what you said.
Sorry, the cell service is bad. It looks like someone else added their name onto that because I didn't write that part.
Oh, okay. It's Anna Karen. There you go. Not a question. Okay, well, I apologize if I sent the wrong link to you. That is completely possible. But I will do a better job of making sure I'm sending you the right links for each meeting here. I usually copy and paste a previous to take that risk out of my out of the possibilities. But yeah, I definitely want to have the right link going towards you guys. Let me just check on my end. You are quite right. Sorry about that. All right. Well, I'll make sure to make a correction to that, Anna Karen. Thank you very much for pointing that out. So I don't want to make this any harder for people, and it's certainly very helpful to have questions on this document as we go forward. What I may start doing is placing some text answers on these too, just so we have a reference, and if for some reason somebody has a similar question as we're going along in the course and they reference the document here, they at least will get an answer without having to repost it. So I will update this a little bit later today, and that's probably the format we'll use going forward, as I will make sure we get answers placed here at each class. Let me see here. All right, so Melissa had a question. Is there a dimension in the SWOT analysis not covered already by identifying regional challenges? Is there a dimension in the SWOT analysis not covered already? I'm not sure I totally understand. Melissa, can you unmute yourself and elaborate on that a bit for me?
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
I just noticed that there's a SWOT analysis after the regional challenges section, as well as after the sector section. And I was just wondering if isn't the SWOT analysis sort of redundant after we've done the regional challenges and opportunities?
Well,
Or is there more to that I'm missing?
no, I get it. And you might find with the occasional assignment that it may feel a bit redundant. I think the beauty of going through the SWOT analysis is it gets you considering. So for instance, with your sector compass, right? You've gone through this exercise. Let's say we're looking at the student example here. And the student has gone through and done this assignment. And then on reflection, what here is a strength, of the sectors that you've seen and documented. What is a strength? What is a weakness? Where's our opportunities? So I do think that that's a really helpful exercise to go through. And it should, as we're identifying challenges, it should almost be an automatic that, okay, this is a problem or a challenge we have with our project site. How,
Uh,
how can we spin that?
I'm sorry, I might not have I meant after the regional challenges section, not the compass section. There's also a SWOT analysis there.
Right.
And so I thought it seemed redundant since you're
Yeah, well,
identifying it. So was there some more to that I'm missing?
well, no, I don't. I think in some ways you're right. In this is kind of a minor portion of the assignment. But having, as you go through here, there may be some things that pop up that are quite obvious. Not only in terms of weaknesses or threats, but some of the opportunities, right? And some of those strengths. So, you do, okay, one question would be, uh, do I use a SWOT analysis when I'm designing? And the answer would probably be of sorts. I think when you go through this design process enough that you start to take these steps internally, maybe, and they may even be unconscious, right? So when you look at, and this comes out of being a contractor as well, when you're on a site and things pop up, which they often do, is trying to see how that can be, you know, whether that is a strength or a weakness and how we can get the most out of it. So, one example, and it has nothing to do with site and regional chat. Well, it does a little bit. So my wife and myself live, we're on 5 acres. We have a pretty active drainage ditch at the top of our property that picks up a lot of runoff from our neighbors who are above us by 2 or 3 feet. Not a lot of elevation, but they sit above our property. And there is a huge amount of flow on that ditch during the winter months. So it's been in the back of our mind to optimize that, because right now, or up until recently, that water would just head out to a roadside ditch. So that was really a flood sector for us. And we upgraded the pipe that goes out to the road, about a decade ago, just to have a little bit of assurance that it wasn't going to back up. And then this year, what we've done is we've diverted that ditch into a really large infiltration basin. So almost like a giant rain garden. And if we have time today, I might show you a couple pictures. It's under production right now, but so it's not a finished product, But again, that's taking a liability, what most people would see as a liability, and spinning it into a benefit. So we are slowing that water down, and it's going to benefit our landscape, especially through the drier months. So we're really trying to increase our water holding capacity, and we do so with cisterns. We've got about 14,000 gallons of storage, but we're also doing it with trying to sink as much water as possible into our landscape. So I hope that's kind of a long-winded question, Melissa, but hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Yeah, and just regarding the SWOT analysis, if you notice on the discussion board and you go to the rubric, you'll see that there's a point for the SWOT analysis, say with the sector compass, as well as it's built into the site and regional challenge survey. So if you deleted that and you didn't want to fill it in, you probably will lose a point for that, right? So again, it's a good exercise to go through, even if you feel it is a little bit of redundancy. There may be a few little treasured pieces that you identify that you can carry later on into the design process itself. So hopefully that helps you out. Let's see. There we go. We're back on sectors. So this is the biggest part of the assignment, is really identifying all of the sectors that have an influence on your project site. Again, we've got our base map created now, and we are really in the beginnings of our site analysis, and that's going to take us over the next several lessons. We're going to be looking at a number of things, or the use of the property or project site, and that'll be viewed in terms of zones. The other is going to be water. We're going to look at how water behaves on and off the project site, micro watersheds and how they influence your site, and the soils. And it's only after that that we're going to start looking at applying some design elements. So site analysis is a huge part of this design protocol. And that's one of the big differences between traditional landscape architecture and permaculture design. There's no doubt with landscape architecture that site analysis is part of the process, but in my experience, often in typical or traditional landscapes, the designer can, in some cases, impose their will on the site. And a big example of that is drainage. And that's inherent in our traditional building process, where we like to drain and drain a site and then pump water in when we need it, rather than looking at the water that's currently on the site and how we can utilize that during the drier season. So just one example, and there are many, but we're very fortunate in that we've kind of lived in that traditional landscape design and contractor mode for a number of years, and we've always leaned heavily into permaculture, even before we had heard about it. We always had great care given to our soils and multi-layer plantings. And then, of course, when we came into permaculture, it was, a big aha moment, and it really expanded our approach and getting the most from the resources that are already on a site and make it look beautiful at the same time. So let me see here. I don't think there are any other questions on here. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question, Brittany. But again, I will follow up after the call and put some text answers on all of these. And that way we're going to have good reference rather than just referencing a video. Okay. All right. Well, we have a few minutes left and certainly open to any questions anybody has about this lesson or anything related to the course. We can talk about anything you wish. So if you do want to focus on anything like that, please just pop your hand up or type something in the chat and we can take a look at it. And if not, then we'll probably have we'll have an early conclusion to our meeting here. So completely up to you guys what you'd like to do in the next, well, it looks like 20 minutes or so. So does anybody have any questions at all or concerns or anything they want to throw out to the group? All right. Well, oh, all right. Well, you can unmute yourself, Quinn, and feel free.
Hey, I don't know if this is too far afield, but can you hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I know that I read or you mentioned that you have a background in rainwater catchment
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that. I'm just thinking about that for my site and wondering what your thoughts are about the different materials used in rainwater catchment. You know, I know plastic seems to be pretty common or favored, and you know, I just was curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. I gather, just to confirm, that you're talking about what's termed as active rainwater collection. So we're taking water off of a roof and storing it in some container. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Because we can also look at passive rainwater harvesting, and that's sending it into a rainwater harvesting structure that's in the ground, not storing it in a tank. But you're quite right. Polyethylene is the flavor of the day when it gets into when we look at storage containers, and they tend to give us you know, the best bang for our dollar in terms of the cost per gallon of storage. That is for here. Let's we can look at a couple here. I'll go on to a website that has some. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to share my screen and we will take a look at a couple of different tank options and some of the pluses and minuses.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. This is a retail wholesaler we use in British Columbia here. There would be a lot of different options in your area, but again, they have some pretty cool products here, and these are worth looking at. So if we look at above ground tanks, there's a couple of different options here. So you can see there's galvanized steel, but this is the most common where we're getting polyethylene. And they are made for potable use. So that's a good thing to keep in the back of your mind, depending on the end use of your rainwater. They, again, are above ground. So that means that the materials used is just strong enough to hold the water within the vessel, and we're not worried about any pressures from the outside. So some of the disadvantages of that is it is low cost. That's a plus. One of the disadvantages is it is exposed to cold weather, so you have to be mindful of that, and you want to winterize certain components before we get very cold weather. With our system, we pump rainwater up, and as soon as we start going into a cold, we get a bit of Arctic outflow, and we go into some cold, freezing weather, we won't be pumping water up there for a little while. We will just hold off until we get, well, of course, there wouldn't be anything to pump up if it's freezing. But we're still collecting, but we're not, we have a bit of an unusual situation where we have a pump chamber. So we collect off our roof surface into 1,000-gallon, kind of like the smaller, not quite like that, but a 1,000-gallon cistern, and we pump from that up to our main storage, which is higher in our landscape. And we have let me see here, we have 5 cisterns. So we have some 3,000-gallon and some 2,500-gallon cisterns, and they're all in the same area. And that's the beauty of this system, is you can expand on it as your resources allow, right? We started out with 2, and so we started out with 5,000 gallons of storage, and we just keep increasing that as much as we can. So that is a great option, especially for smaller urban sites, right? Where we are, we're on acreage, and this year we were going to excavate a large irrigation pond. So we were going to send our roof water into that pond for summer use. But we discovered that early on in our process that we had some hard pan very high up in our soil profile. So we shifted gears, and we're still putting a pond in. It'll be more for ecological purposes for the frogs, because we have a lot of frogs here and we love them, and we want to keep supporting their presence here. But that is the next step if you want to lower your cost per gallon of storage, is an irrigation pond itself, right? So where we are, we would have to line it. So it was probably going to be a $20,000 expense, but we were going to get around 60,000 gallons of storage. So that would give us 2 or 3 months of irrigation requirements if we had no other water to access. But that didn't pan out. So we still store our rainwater. It's just we now are trying to, we'll say, embed as much as possible into our landscape and increase our water holding capacity. But yeah, plastic's a big part of we'll call it polyethylene, because that's a little different than traditional plastics. You can go with, if we go back to stainless steel.
I read somewhere that galvanized steel tanks still have a kind of plastic liner on the inside.
Yes, it does. It has like a fish line, fish safe. Well, would it be a potable safe? It's almost like a pond liner that's inside. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a kind of a 2-step. The galvanized steel is for the structure, and it's not waterproof. And so you need a liner inside of there. And these cost, they're probably 3 or 4 times the cost. But the beauty of these is that they potentially come in a very large size. In these examples here, these are for a fire hall. But these can come for potable use. And I believe they go up to 20, 30,000 gallons in size. They'll probably go further than that. So with a potable system, instead of spreading out all of your water collection in separate cisterns, there's an advantage of keeping it all in one, right? And keep that water as stable as possible. Those are the two biggies. Now, if you can go into burial tanks and graph. This is a stormwater tank, but it's the same thing for rainwater. These are much heavier duty tanks. These are a two-piece unit made in Germany. They'll withstand loads from vehicle, and you can have them below ground so frost is not an issue. You can run them year round, provided your piping is protected. But again, they're much a greater cost per gallon, and the whole excavation and installation of that is much more labor intensive, right? So if you end up making an error, imagine this fitting is leaking and you don't discover that until it's operational. That happened to me once. We buried a tank and it had a little leak in it, and I think you had to dig about 7 feet down to find it. And so, you get really careful when you're putting these fittings in. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, we're using the above ground polyethylene tanks that we showed you here earlier. Yeah.
And plastic is kind of falling out of popular favor, maybe in some ways. I'm curious if you're aware of any like other materials that are being used, like recycled stainless steel drums or barrels, like wooden barrels, or if you have any thoughts or experience with any alternatives.
Yeah, there's you could do poured in place concrete. That is done fairly often here. Somebody's chimed in here, ferro cement. Yeah, you see that done more often than not. That is in areas where polyethylene is not accessible. It's just so light and relatively easy to install, but it's so large that, for instance, in Hawaii, it's cost prohibitive to get them shipped to Hawaii. So what do they do there? They often use swimming pools, above ground swimming pools with a cover over it. And that's not a great idea, but that's what they do. And there's I know one of the ARCSA, which is the American Rainwater Catchment Association, one of their trainers had a story about going to Hawaii and visiting a couple of sites. And at one site, the family had gotten sick from drinking the rainwater, and they were unsure what was going on. And they took the lid off the above ground pool, and there was a dead cat in the pool. So these are the sort of things that you really want to be mindful of, is access to that vessel with an above ground polyethylene tank. If you have an overflow, well, you definitely want an overflow in place, but with the overflow, you have to put in what's called a backwater valve, like a flapping valve, so you don't get vectors entering the tank through the overflow. But there's all kinds of different materials. Concrete in this area concrete, polyethylene. The steel that is lined is rare because it's such a cost prohibitive product. You know, it's pre-engineered, so that's a good thing, but the cost of it's quite high. There are these other items, these specialty tanks that will fit into awkward spaces like fence panels and under decks and stuff. And they're also made out of polyethylene. So the same product. I don't have an issue with polyethylene in that it's fully recyclable, right? And I've had tanks. Two of my tanks here are 25 years old and they're completely fine. So they're not now. I have them in a wooded area, so they don't get full UV on them. So, but their lifespan is quite long, and so for this part of the world, that is the place to go. If you're building a new home and you want to have a really diverse system, and you're not sure how you're going to use that, you know, having a poured in place concrete that gets sealed up with a potable, you know, a safe compound. It's like a tar almost that they put on the inside, and that seals up the concrete. But again, it's more, you know, much more expensive. But it really depends on the end use. And for our end use, it's irrigating annual vegetables. If your end use was for potable water, then that is a totally different kettle of fish. So, and much more expensive. Where I live, that's probably a $30,000 or $40,000 item to get a potable rainwater system on average for a house with enough storage to take you through the year. Yeah, I hope I'm just while I got you on rainwater, big thing that most people perhaps don't really look at is filtration. And that is a big part of collection. So if you're considering a system, you know, one of the easy kind of first stage filters are these leaf eater. They're called leaf eaters, and they become the interface between your gutter or your downspout and your PVC piping that's below here that takes that to the tank. And they call that the conveyance piping. But this will give you, let's see, that gives you about 1,000 microns of filtration. Right here, 955. So that keeps mosquitoes out. It keeps everything out of your conveyance piping that you want to, you know, you want to keep out. It will filter out debris, but this isn't quite enough filtration in my opinion. So you find sludge at the bottom of your tank if you use just this type of filter. You have to go sort of one step further, and well, this is the ultimate. This is what we use when we can, and this takes it down to 180 microns so that you can store the water and then you can send it out into drip irrigation without any fear of it clogging up your system. Yeah.
Super helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Is there any other questions that anybody has? Let me just stop that. There we go. Comment from Waking Up 2020. I have a friend who actually got a stainless steel tank, but it cost her a fortune. Yeah. Yes, they are very expensive. There's no doubt of that. And in essence, it's within a you know, the liners needed, so you're really not getting away from some level of plastics. Yeah,
Can I ask a quick question about
sure.
a couple of things? Our accountant just told us that we can write off 100% of things that we buy for our farm in
Mhm.
2022, but in 2023, we can only do 80%. And then
Oh,
we have to amortize it, and we have a big tree bough harvest coming in. So we're trying to offset that income.
yeah.
So we're trying to figure out whether we should get, one or two huge tanks versus a bunch of small ones,
Mhm.
kind of before we have our plan in place. But it's sounding to me more like we should do some small ones so that we have the opportunity to move them around the farm.
Yeah, well, what's your end use? Is it for livestock?
Well, until you said what you just said, we were actually considering not drilling a well, because drilling a
Mhm.
well out there, a lot of people are getting dry holes these days. And
Sure.
one neighbor not too far got two dry holes, and then finally got water on the third one. I don't know, they must have money coming out their ears, because they probably spent 50 grand
Sure.
on the dry holes.
Mhm.
And so, but you're saying that it's like 40 grand just to do a potable water, rainwater collection system. Why is that? And can you talk more about that?
It's every component that you use within your system has to be potable rated, even the glues. So that doesn't make it that much more expensive. That's not a big deal because most of these products are made that way. But what happens is you need that early filtration. So that filter I was just showing you on the screen here in where I live, that's a $600 filter, right? And that's just one small component. But after filtration, you have to keep it oxygenated. So you have to have some oxygenation component within your cistern. And then you have to send it through a system of sediment filters and UV filters in order to obtain a drinking water quality standard.
I've seen those before. I didn't realize all that was that expensive, especially if you're putting it together yourself.
Yeah, if you did it yourself, it would be less. You do need, there's a couple of really critical steps, and the first is doing a water budget, figuring out your usage, what is it you need,
Mhm.
and what your roof area collection is going to be, and how that's all going to balance. That's a big first step. Even with a non-potable system, you want to know what your usage is. So how much do I need to collect? For us, we know we can't collect enough, and that's often the case in the Pacific Northwest if you're irrigating with it. But for potable use, it's a question of having the system designed for you. If you wanted to try and do some of the work yourself, which I think is a great idea, you'd be well advised to have someone design the system for you and a blueprint you can follow. They will also kind of point you in the right direction in terms of where to get materials, and they may even be able to help you sort of broker parts via a wholesaler. But yeah, that's where I live. People phone about potable rainwater. It's going to be 35 and up, right? So
Wow.
yeah, there's a lot to it, and yeah, of course, you have to be able to operate the system through the coldest winter months. So that also plays into it. How is that going to happen?
It's not so cold down here as it is up there.
Yeah, well, believe it or not, where I live, I'm a hardiness zone of 8B, so it's probably,
Oh, wow.
pretty close. Yeah, we're very, I can see the water and the ocean, that ocean has a tremendous uh, warming effect for us. You go inland a little bit, even on Vancouver Island, which, it's a pretty big island, but you go inland, um, just a half-hour drive, and it's a different world. It's much colder and then much hotter. So you get that continental effect the further
Right.
you go inland. No different to Oregon, right? If you're on the coast versus going inland, you're going to get more extremes with cold and, typically with cold and heat. So, yeah.
Another thing I was surprised to hear is like when you were doing your pond, you've got this huge excavator. I was shocked that hardpan would stop that. Like, how come you
Yeah,
can't go through it and
oh,
just
we could. I was having, when we were in that process, we came up with this concept, and because it's a little harder when it's your own property. For
what do you mean?
us, if we were going down that road, we were going to have a lot of hard to use material that was coming out of the hole.
Mm.
And we were weighing all of that against the benefit to our landscape. And the reality is it wasn't going to benefit. We have we have an irrigation pond, you go a foot away from the pond, it's the Sahara Desert, in that it's, all of that water is getting redirected onto annual vegetable gardens, has nothing to do with the rest of the property. So we've kind of hit I think, a sweet spot where we're still collecting enough where we have a good buffer and we have a really good producing well. So we can augment that during the summer. And we have a water meter. So we're watching every gallon that gets taken out of our well that goes up to our cisterns, because that is kind of our main pumping area. And regardless of whether that ends up having rainwater or well water in it, that's just kind of our hub for water distribution.
Mhm.
So it was definitely not an easy decision, but we've just leaned towards infiltration and benefiting an orchard that's down slope from
So in a
where.
way you are irrigating, it's just you're doing
Yeah,
it. Got it.
yeah, I think it'll have a remarkable outcome. I mean, if you walk down the road and you look at a ditch, a roadside ditch, and you look how fertile the bottom of that is, and as you go up the edge of the ditch, it's, the fertility starts to be reduced until you get to the top, and then it's more arid. Um, we are planting edible moisture-loving plants around this rain garden in this sort of zone 2 that are going to, autumn olive is an example of a shrub that we quite enjoy the fruit, and it requires a bit of irrigation. Where we live, it gets a bit dry, so we're wanting to get away from irrigation and placing plants where they're going to work, and that's in part of our concept with this is we're not going to be irrigating these plants after establishment. They should have no issue carrying, moving forward on their own. And in some ways, it's a bit of a similar version to what Brad Lancaster does. And if you look at any of his books, he has a wonderful book on rainwater harvesting and beyond. It's for dry lands, and it sounds like, wow, if I don't live in Texas or Arizona, I wouldn't be really interested in this book, but it's a fantastic book. He has 2 volumes, and the first volume is, they're both really good. If you, with your position and you're considering potable water collection, for rainwater collection for potable use, I would highly recommend getting his books. But he also goes,
What's his name again?
Brad Lancaster.
Okay.
Yeah, and the book's called, here, I'll just show you on screen here. Let's go to, he's got, let's see here. Nope, nope. There we are. So harvestingrainwater.com. And those are his 2 books, and they are really, really informative. So here's a good example of his concept, collecting water, reusing it for shower, it going out into the landscape, that sort of repeated use. And this is sort of a pit planting that he would typically do in Tucson.
Yeah.
And so they capture high rain events and it infiltrates into this area that's depressed, it's lower. And then the tree or whatever plant materials in here benefits from that water. And there's lots. That's very simplistic explanation on my part, but he loads this up with woody matter, organic matter, so it's more like a sponge. We couldn't do what he's done here where I live because this tree would be submerged, for half of the year.
Right.
And there would be the odd tree that would do okay, but we're taking this a little bit a different approach where this zone, which he calls zone 1 at the bottom, is really going to be pushed up into zone 2. So we're going to have woody plants up in this shelf that's still going to have access to the water when it pools. But the very bottom is really full of sedges and plants that are quite adapted to being covered with water for quite a bit of the year. Yeah, more of a traditional rain garden approach, which of course we're going to dive into as we get to lesson 5. But yeah, his books are fabulous. And a few years back, we actually had a rainwater harvesting course here at OSU, and I helped Andrew put that together, and it ran for a year or so, but it's under modification now. It's being changed a little bit. But yeah, these are great references. Can't go wrong with those.
Thanks.
Yeah. So if there is no other questions, I should probably terminate our meeting here. I got to get ready for another meeting in a few minutes. But I want to thank everybody for joining me today and some really good questions. And I'll make sure I follow up with our Q&A sheet and put the answers on those. As well. Thank you, Anna Karen, for pointing out that the wrong link was sent out there, and we'll get that all adjusted for our next meeting. So have a great week, everybody. If you run into any challenges during the week, you can certainly drop me a note, and I'm happy to help you out. But we'll look forward to seeing your next assignment. So you take care and have yourself a great week.